Hello, my name is Lauren Freed, and I'm a Physical Health and Wellness Manager at Wounded Warrior Project and a Doctor of Health Science candidate at Penn West University. Welcome to the session on the Readiness Reset for Sleep, Stress, and Pain Management for Health. This session is a recording. The original live session took place on October 14th, 2025 via Microsoft Teams with 17 participants that were active duty and veterans. Before we get started on today's session, I want to walk through several questions that were asked to the group through a poll on Microsoft Teams to reflect on some questions related to sleep, stress, and chronic pain, and that will also set us up for the session today. So the first question that we have was about how many hours of sleep do you get per night, with the option of less than 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours, 6 to 7 hours, 7 to 9 hours, and 9 hours or more. I will say the results from the group were between the 4 to 6 hours primarily, so definitely demonstrating that we are not getting much sleep. The second question that was asked to the group was, what do you struggle with the most? Falling asleep, staying asleep, or both? This was very split amongst the group between falling asleep and staying asleep and the both option. So all of the above are issues that we're seeing. Question 3, on a scale of 1 to 5, where do you rank your stress? 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. As you can imagine, most people were in the 4s and 5s. And the next question was, where do you experience pain in the body? This was a multi-pick list option, so people were able to pick any of these, as many as they want or as little as they want. So there were a lot of head, from TBI injuries, shoulders, lower back, and then hips and knees were the primary areas that we saw, with a few in the ankles and feet and upper back. Upper back was primarily the T-spine and limited mobility. The last question we ended with was, what area of focus do you feel you need the most support with? And this was pretty even across the board. People were picking sleep, stress, and pain, depending on who they were and what they were here for. So after our poll, we went into the presentation, and that's what we're going to start with today. So some objectives that we're going to cover are recognizing the interrelationship between sleep, stress, and pain for their collective impact on overall health, readiness, and resilience, applying key principles of sleep science and stress physiology to identify personal factors influencing performance and recovery, demonstrating awareness of behavioral and environmental strategies that improve sleep hygiene, reduce stress, and support injury prevention, and also identify appropriate support systems and care networks to sustain holistic well-being and optimize readiness outcomes, which we will summarize at the end. So we first want to start with a note on the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And this is really important because we want to highlight that lifestyle, everyday choices make up pretty much 53% of what we are dealing with health-wise for the past 20 years. So the emphasis on this is that behavioral change does matter, and behaviors do play a huge impact in how we live day to day. So we also do see that medical care, 10%, hereditary, 18% environment, or 19%, but that is a vastly lower number than our everyday lifestyle. So there is hope for being able to make adjustments and to really showcase what we can do from a few small things of behavior change that we'll discuss today. So starting with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is also important to highlight because at the very basis is the physiological needs. And one thing that I want to point out here is that sleep is within that level. So we need sleep to be able to function in day to day and to rest and recover, to repair our muscles, to repair our minds, and it is important for us to get sleep. So the first thing that we're going to chat about today is all the sleep science. So I want us to start out with two chemicals in our brain that are serotonin and dopamine. These are probably not unfamiliar. I'm sure you've all heard of these, but the brain needs several chemicals to maintain mood regulation and other functions. And two of the largest ones are serotonin and dopamine. So these impact our sleep and also our happy hormones and making sure that we are exactly where we need to be. So with serotonin and dopamine, there's an impact with healthy diet, sleep, and physical activity. So our healthy diet is really giving the nutrients that we need to the brain to produce the serotonin. Obviously, the sleep is helping us process the information and also recovering our muscles that we had used throughout the day. The interesting part is that in our sleep patterns, we go through different sleep cycles. So we have our light sleep cycle, our deep sleep cycle, and then we also have our REM sleep cycle, or our rapid eye movement. And within the REM cycle, that is where we are ultimately repairing. So all of our thoughts that we had throughout the day or things that we learned, they're being processed into our long-term memory. And also all of the muscles are repairing, and pretty much every cellular system in our body is recovering in our REM sleep. So it is important for us to get REM sleep, and it can be challenging for some, but we do need it. And then the last part is physical activity, and I want you to think of this about is movement. So physical activity does not necessarily mean that you have to show up to a gym. It can be any type of movement throughout the day, whether that be recreational sports, maybe going hiking, walking, kayaking, paddleboarding, and also just being active in a gym. So lots of opportunities here, and it does help release the dopamine into the brain. So it is a cycle that we need, and they help with all body processes that we endure day to day. So what does a healthy sleep cycle lead to? We need it to help regulate our emotions, maintain our immunity, support memory, and improve focus. So as I said in the last slide, why this is so important is because we do need to get to our REM sleep cycle, because that's where all of our repair is happening. Throughout a night, there is different sleep cycles that do happen. So your average sleep cycle is 90 minutes long, and the REM sleep cycle is the last part of that 90 minutes. So typically throughout a night, you would go through 4 different sleep cycles, and your REM sleep would get bigger as the night went on. So it is important for us to make sure that we are going through our sleep cycles and that we are being able to fully recover through light sleep, deep sleep, and then obviously REM sleep, because we want to help support our stress, we want to improve our ability to focus and our cognitive health, and we also want to eliminate some of those feelings of fatigue. So if we're not fully being able to repair at night, then the next day we will struggle from a cognitive standpoint and also physical standpoint, and just generally feel tired. This is also why we talk about napping. With napping, ideally, you would want to nap less than or around 20 minutes, or you would want to nap over 90 minutes. And the reason for that is because it's within our sleep cycles. So you want to make sure that you wake up before you get into a deep sleep, which is before that 20-30 minute mark. And then you want to make sure that you would wake up at 90 minutes, because that is when you're finished your REM sleep and your next sleep cycle is starting. If you wake up in the middle of a sleep cycle, whether that be napping and or just from day-to-day sleeping, a lot of times that's when you start to get that groggy feeling, because you haven't finished a sleep cycle and you're in deep sleep or REM sleep, which obviously very deep process when you're sleeping. So lots of things that healthy sleep can support, and tons of it is with the brain and body. So the other part of this as well is that sleep plays a role in every single body system that we have. So we need sleep to help us survive from day to day. We talked a little bit about the cognitive side of sleep and making sure memory-wise that we're supported. Sleep also impacts mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression. PTSD is a big one for veterans and active duty. So making sure that we're supporting our mental health. Our immunity is huge. When our systems are depleted and they're not able to recover, we are immune deficient, which can lead to disease. Cardiovascular disease, you will see that typically when people are not sleeping consistently and they are always full of stress, they have high cortisol levels, and their body is struggling to come into a rest and digest system. A lot of times their resting heart rate is actually substantially higher than it should be. So this can lead to higher blood pressure and cardiovascular issues. It also does play a role in hormone imbalances, one of those big ones being cortisol in our bodies. When we are stressed, when we're not sleeping, we have higher levels of cortisol, which is something that we want to address because we want our body to go into a full cycle of rest and digest, which we'll talk about later. It does increase our level of pain and inflammation that we have in our body. It can lead to obesity, and it can also lead to type 2 diabetes. So it does impact all of our different sleep systems. So getting into some veteran and active duty specific stats, because I think this is really important to highlight. So with sleep deprivation, through a research study that happened, they found that about 66% of active duty are obviously struggling with sleep, 76% with veterans, and then in comparison to the civilian population at only about 35%. So we can tell that active duty and veterans are typically sleeping about a little over half, for some of these a little under half, compared to our everyday civilians. So it is something that we need to address. And then to follow up with this, they also talked about the hours of sleep per night. So the general population is getting about 6.7 hours per sleep per night, and then veterans are getting about 5.6 hours of sleep per night. This is also very interesting because there has been research that they studied the hours of sleep per night in comparison to the number of times people are deployed. And as expected, they did find that the hours of sleep go down as the number of deployments increases. However, they did also find, which is pretty interesting, that even post-deployment, so somebody who has been off of a deployment for 5 years or X amount of time frame, their hours of sleep per night is still impacted as if they're on deployment. So we are seeing that number of deployments is a big factor, but then any type of being on deployment is impacting the sleep long term, which is why you see the sleep number pretty low in comparison to civilians. The next interesting thing I want to highlight is the use of sleep aids. So as we know, the use of prescription medications is very high within the veteran population. A lot of this is, we talk about the VA prescribing a lot of medications for all different things, but a huge sleep aid especially is used for PTSD and to help with night terrors, night tremors, and really just any of those nightmares that are happening at night. So for our sleep prescription medications, there is a vast difference in what veterans are being prescribed versus the general population, which I think is pretty alarming and something that we definitely want to dive into more from a research and also just health perspective. So 24.6% versus 8%, like I said, vast difference. Over-the-counter aids, 10.3% in veterans, 7% in general population. This can be something like melatonin. It can also be things like Benadryl, ZzzQuil, NyQuil, different elements that people use to help them sleep. The big thing with over-the-counter aids is that it does impact your sleep cycles. So even melatonin, if you feel as though you are able to stay asleep, you still aren't getting the rest that you truly need because they impact the REM cycles and the deep sleep cycles. So even though you might be staying asleep the entire night, you aren't getting into those sleep cycles that you need for full recovery. And then the last one, alcohol, 9.1% for veterans, 7% for general population. Very similar. Alcohol is also impacting your sleep cycles. So even if you feel like you are staying asleep throughout the night, you actually aren't getting full recovery. So some things to look at for our sleep disorders and ways to prevent. So obviously supplements is something that can be looked at. We won't talk too much about this today. I always say consult your practitioner and a doctor to make sure that this is something that you would need to use. From a supplement perspective, there are supplements that do help with sleep. Big ones are iron, magnesium, and calcium. But the second part of this is that you might not need them depending on what your blood panels look like. So I encourage you all to go get a blood panel done, see what your vitamin and mineral levels are, and see if this is something that could be impacted. Vitamin D is also a big supplement that helps with a lot of functions in the body and does typically run low for people. So encourage you consult a professional and see if supplement route is something that could help with your sleep disorders. From a diet perspective, we want to make sure that we are having a whole foods diet, a diet rich in nutrients, fiber, obviously having all our macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. The thing that is so important is that our carbs are what fuel our body and our brain. So we do need carbs in our diet. And they can also help with our sleep. So making sure that we're eating a nutrient-rich diet. Tryptophan is a molecule in food that does help us sleep. So I always joke, bring up Thanksgiving, which is right around the corner, but there is something to be said for us having turkey and being sleepy after Thanksgiving. I think a lot of it tends to be the excessive amount of sugars and carbs and just food that we're consuming, but there is high levels of tryptophan in turkey, which tryptophan is a sleeping molecule that does help us sleep. So there's something to be said for being tired at Thanksgiving. And then our omega-3 fatty acids, also very important. You can find these in fish is a big one, also a lot of nut products. So walnuts is another big one, Brazilian nuts, another big source, but making sure that we have good omega-3s through avocado oils and other fatty acids. Into exercise, I mentioned this before, we want to do something that leaves us feel energized. So exercise can be supplemented with the word movement. We want to make sure that you are moving throughout the day, getting your steps in, and finding something that you love to do. I am a huge person to say that if you are not doing a workout because you dread that workout, you should probably change it. So find something that you are passionate about, that you enjoy doing, and that you are going to do. Don't do something that you absolutely despise and it causes you not to stay active. So get your movement in, get your steps in. And then last is habits, making sure that we have a good sleep schedule throughout our day. This also stays into our off days or weekends. And that means that you should be waking up and going to sleep around the same time throughout the week and days off. This is important for routine and making sure that we are getting in our sleep cycles. Obviously, limiting caffeine. Caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours. It stays in our body for 12 hours. So this is really important because so many people have a afternoon coffee because we feel the crash in the afternoon. And the reason for this is because if we wake up and we have caffeine in the morning, right, about 6 hours later is when that crash happens. That is probably going to be around 1 to 3 p.m. for most people. So then they reconsume more caffeine and then they're up throughout the night because that's leading you into 10, 11, 12 p.m. or a.m. and then you aren't sleeping. So making sure that you are limiting your caffeine intake for the day, and that in itself is a huge behavior shift that can happen that will support people's sleep in so many different areas. It's just solely caffeine intake, which is pretty crazy, but as a society, we consume so much caffeine, which is why we want to bring some of that back and try to reduce our caffeine intake if that is something that you do. The other part is nicotine and alcohol. We obviously talked about alcohol previously. Nicotine, same thing. It is a stimulant that will keep you awake. So we want to make sure that we are really focusing in on our everyday habits and making sure that we are creating a sleep environment for ourselves that, one, feels safe and is also comfortable. Another thing that I like to address is your actual bedroom temperature, so it should be 62 to 68 degrees, which may seem pretty cold for some of you, but it is important because it does help you sleep. And also just making sure that you don't have electronics in the room that is causing you to not sleep as well because of those blue lights. And also light in general will make us stay awake. So being mindful of making sure that we are not relying on TV to fall asleep, on our phones, and limiting some of that blue light that is keeping us awake. So moving into the second piece of this is the stress cycle. And we started to dive into this, but I want to address it a little bit more because there is good stress that we go through, and then there's bad stress that we go through. So everyday stress is important for us. We do need stress in our lives, but there can be good stress, which is our eustress, and there can also be poor stress, which is stress that stays around and we never go into rest and digest because of it. So the first part of our stress cycle is that something stressful occurs. So whether that be a message you receive, a meeting, a deadline, difficult conversation, something that happens in the environment like fight or flight, that you are protecting yourself and your body is triggering that response to make sure that you can protect yourself in a harmful situation. So there are reasons that our body does need stress, and it can help us. So as soon as that stressor happens, the next step is that a stress response system is activated. So this is activated in the amygdala, and that stress response occurs, which typically is fight or flight or freeze. And it's when our body is full of stress. So this is when we start to do whatever we need to do to get by that stressor. Next, that stressor is handled and ultimately it should disappear. So whether the situation has come to terms or you're able to bypass it, that meeting has happened, whatever the stressor might be, your stressor has depleted. So at this moment, your stress response system should be deactivating. So this is when your body should be able to settle down, you should be going into rest and digest, and you should be able to quiet the mind, quiet the body, and come back to homeostasis, to neutral. The issues start to occur when this step number 4 doesn't happen. So if you are still in fight or flight and your body never comes out of fight or flight, this is when our cortisol increases and will stay increased. This is when we'll start to have other health issues because we're never coming out of that stress marker. So our blood pressure is probably always high, our heart rate is probably always high, and we are obviously struggling in this state. So really important for us to be mindful of making sure that we are able to come out of fight, flight, or freeze and get into rest and digest. In a perfect world, ideally, our system should be deactivated. We should be able to rest and recover, and then the cycle should be complete. So as we know, this is a problem if this cycle doesn't finish, and we want to make sure that we can do what we can to support it. So with stress, also leads to a lot of inflammation in the body, which can also lead to pain. So the interesting part is through the stress, pain, and also sleep cycle, there are physiological factors that happen, there are cognitive behavioral factors that happen, and then there's also an element of the social and lifestyle factors. So the thing that can be challenging about stress and pain is that a lot of it is a perception. So things that stress me out might not stress you out. Things that I feel like are a high level of pain, you might not feel like they're a high level of pain. So it can be really challenging to report on stress and pain to health professionals because we perceive it very different, which this is why it's important to also make sure that we are keeping our own stress and pain logs because we're able to then showcase what that stressor or what that pain was like from day in and day out and have a comparison with our and amongst ourselves versus trying to compare to other people. So obviously stress in the body, chronic inflammation is a physiological factor. This leads to being less active because our body is now inflamed, which can also lead to joint and muscle pain and some discomfort. This typically then leads to the loss of fitness. Obviously, we have weakening and more stiffness in our body. We're limiting our mobility. And then we start to make a list that we can't do or a no-go list. And a lot of times I always say right there, we want to reframe the mind in the way that we think. The mind is a very powerful tool. So we want to make sure that we are saying good things to ourselves and that we are saying that we will do this, we can do this. We're going into everything with a positive attitude. However, typically in this downward spiral, we're saying we can't do things. We're then having sleep problems, tiredness, fatigue because of pain that we're in, or we are already poorly sleeping and now we have increased stress and pain in our bodies. This is then leading to stress, fear, anxiety, anger, frustration, all of these feelings. Typically, our social wellness is depleting as well because a lot of times we are staying inside and we're not feeling motivated. This can also lead to a lot of negative thinking, fear of the future, which can also be challenging because if you have an injury and you have a instance that happened that led to that injury, this can also be cause a sense of fear in the future as to why you might not want to do it because it resulted in an injury previously. But fear of the future and what that's going to look like, depression, mood swings, were obviously then leading to weight gain and or weight loss due to levels of stress and not taking care of our bodies, typically also not fueling our bodies correctly through nutrition. And then sometimes this can also lead to an inability to work, then causing financial strain and also relationship concerns. So this stress, pain, and sleep cycle is very important to make note of and try not to go through the downward spiral because we want to make sure that we are physically healthy, that we are mentally healthy, that we are also financially healthy, socially healthy, have a great environment, right? All of these areas of wellness are very important for us to be balanced in, and we want to make sure that we are balanced across the board because if we have an area that we are imbalanced in, that can cause us to have other issues in other areas of our life. So noting this cycle, we want to talk about where your body holds stress. And we're going to get into a brief activity for this because I think this is something really important. And it'll also be a really good thing to bring to your medical professionals that you work with. So the first thing to note is where your body holds stress. So for some people, this can be headaches. Some people, tight neck and shoulders. A lot of people do carry a lot of stress and tension in their neck and shoulders. Obviously, upper back can be a tension spot, specifically in the T-spine where it's very tight, where there's limited mobility, even though there should be mobility. And then also into the lower hip or lower back, into the hips, knees, ankles. So definitely all parts of our body. There's also pieces into the stomach that we can note in here. A lot of times stress does cause digestive issues because our mind and our gut are connected. So if we are stressed out, if we're struggling with different mental health issues, a lot of times that can activate some digestive distress as well. So making note of where stress is in our body, where it's leading to inflammation, and where we're having pain. And what this looks like is something that we call stress body mapping. So this is just an example of what this would look like from somebody who did some stress mapping of their body. So you can see that they highlighted both the front and back of where their body has stress, inflammation, maybe some pain and tension. So for this person, starting on the back side, they obviously have some tension in their neck and upper shoulders and upper back. Like we said, that's a big area for people to carry stress in their body. They have some pulling in their lower back. They have some tension in their hip. And then they also have some strong tension in their calves into their foot. And they also have like a marker of very little awareness in their foot, which could stem from maybe like a drop foot. It could be plantar fasciitis, right? There could be several issues that are happening in their foot. However, the thing that's interesting is that we're seeing, and note this slide because we'll talk about this next. We're seeing, right, all the same side on the lower body. So that hip, that foot, that ankle, that calf. So it's all same side. On the front side, they obviously are still marking some of that shoulder tension. The other thing that they have is some tension in their chest. So maybe that is stemming from some heart issues as well. And then they also have some notes about their leg, same thing, lots of tension, probably some inflammation, some pain. And then the other interesting part is about their hands. And sometimes this could easily be related to posture, which might also be some of the tension in the upper back. But ideally, good posture, right? Your palms should be forward facing. So in theory, your palms are not supposed to be facing away from you in a postural assessment analysis. So thinking about this stress mapping, this is something for us to be able to mark down, because this is helpful when we go to a doctor. We can take this stress mapping to any medical professional, especially if you're working with like a physical therapist, or a doctor of any source, to be able to really tell them like what is going on with your body. Because sometimes something happens and we forget to tell them because there's so much going on. So this is really important for you to make note of, and maybe it's something that you do weekly, maybe it's something you do bi-weekly, but really just tracking on where the areas of tension are in the body, where the inflammation is, pain, different elements there, and then also just being mindful of what that is on a scale of 1 to 5 as a rating, so you can also talk to people about it. So diving into this piece of the leg and why that could be a thing is because of the kinetic chain. So the kinetic chain is really important for us to note, because it tells everywhere that we should be mobile and stable in our body. And why I made the comment about that person having all of the pain in one side is because it could be that their foot and ankle was not doing the job that it was assigned to do. So then it's now impacting everything above the chain and below the chain. So with our kinetic chain, ideally everything is given a job. And if our body is unable to do that job, then a lot of times the item above it or below it has to change their job to be able to compensate for something that's not happening, and then also still be able to do what they're supposed to do. So there becomes a lot of stress in the body, a lot of pain in the body, and a lot of inflammation in the body. So walking through this, the kinetic chain starts at the bottom, and that is for the foot, and the foot is where there should be stability. So if you have flat feet, if you have high arches, if you have plantar fasciitis, there's a lot of drop foot is another one. There's a lot of elements that might lead to instability of the foot, but we need it to be stable. So from the foot, we need a stable foot. Into the ankles, they should be mobile. The knees should be stable. Obviously, the hip should be mobile. The hip and shoulder are ball and socket joints in the body, so they should actually be the most mobile joints that you have. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, the hip and shoulders are the least mobile parts of the body, which is then leading to a lot of pain, inflammation, and injuries. But we want to make sure that we try to stick to this kinetic chain. The lumbar spine leads to stability. T-spine, your thoracic spine, obviously mobility. And then we talked about the shoulders and the ball and socket joint of the shoulder. So big thing with this is that, as we said, if your body can't perform the task that's assigned to it, that is when we're leading to a lot of pain, inflammation, and injuries, because then we're overcompensating. So this idea of the kinetic chain, it works up and down on the same side, but it also crosses over. So somebody might have left shoulder injury, left shoulder pain, and that leads to right hip injury, right hip pain, because of compensating in different areas of the body. So our body is one full system. And so if something is wrong, then typically it's going to cause or impact something else in the body. So we want to be mindful of really finding what that root cause is, which is why stress mapping is so important, because we're able to then see where we're having all of these different problems. So if you do go to, let's say, a physical therapist and you tell them, I have knee issues, well, they're going to treat you for your knee. Versus if you go to a physical therapist and you say, I have knee issues, but I also had a previous ankle injury, and I also have plantar fasciitis in my foot, and I also have some hip mobility issues. They're now going to be able to sort of treat the entire element of it to then start to support figuring out where the actual source of the pain is stemming from, maybe multiple places, because a lot of times that piece that is injured is typically also impacting other areas of the body. So things to think about when we are dealing with our finding the root cause piece and just really trying to pinpoint what is going on in our bodies. One thing for starters is what situations or scenarios trigger my pain. So this could be a specific workout, this could be a specific movement, and this could even just be an activity of daily life. So this might even be something like putting the plates into the cabinet or carrying the groceries in from the store. So just really thinking about what situations and scenarios trigger that pain to happen. This can also be not sleeping or a stressful event that happens, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be something specific to a movement. It can be something that happens in day-to-day life. The next piece is, what was I thinking at the time my pain flared up? So previously we talked about perception being a big factor. So really thinking about, what was your mindset? Did you go into this movement saying, hey, this squat makes my knee hurt, so it's going to make my knee hurt, before you even did the squat? You already felt your knee hurting because you knew you were going to do a squat and you knew that squats make your knee hurt. So thinking about what your mindset was going into that, and also thinking, is this a perception or is this something that's actually happening? What movements or lack of movements caused my pain to flare up? Obviously causing inflammation in the body. Is it a specific movement, or is it you not moving? So making sure that we're staying active and seeing what movement does do to our body. A lot of times, more movement in our body within reason, we're then loosening our joints, we're getting some mobility in, and a lot of times it's very great for us, especially if you're sitting all day in a job. So being mindful of what movement or lack of movement is causing pain. When does the pain not affect your body? So maybe it's you don't feel the pain at the end of the day. Maybe it's in the morning when you first wake up, but being mindful, because sometimes, if you wake up and you feel a lot of pain and you go throughout your day and you're moving and you're active and you're doing some type of physical activity, mobility, and then you get to the end of the day and you're like, wow, I feel loose, like I'm not in pain right now. So being mindful of when it doesn't impact your body. Environment and climate, is that a trigger for your pain? A lot of times, humidity, rain, dampness, dry weather, cold weather, hot weather, right? We have all different environmental impacts, and that is something to be mindful of. The other thing that's interesting about this is migraines. There's a lot of, with migraines, TBIs, that area for environment and climate. That is why typically your weather apps will actually tell you what the migraine percentage typically is. So being mindful of environment and climate. When in pain, does your mood or behavior change? This is a big one for people. Obviously, a lot of times, yes, your mood and behavior is going to be not as great. You're going to be grumpy. Maybe you're feeling groggy. Maybe you're just upset. You're frustrated. So seeing what that mind shift is, what your mood is, and also the behavior change piece, which is so important. And then lastly, how do I rate my pain during these stressful situations, during these moments? And as we said before, being able to rate your pain and also demonstrating exactly where your pain is, where your inflammation is, where your distress is in your body is going to help a lot when you go to talk to professionals. So some ways to reset. So lots of ways to reset. We've talked about a lot today in this presentation, but big thing, medication is a starter. Regularly taking medication that you have been prescribed, although there are a lot of holistic elements that we can do and we encourage people to do, which we'll talk about in this slide. If you have been prescribed medication for something specific from your healthcare professional, obviously still encouraging you to take that medication. It is still important. However, there are a lot of holistic approaches that we can go into that are very important and that will help you combat some of the pain, some of the stress, and also help with sleep. So physical activity, can't stress enough. Please make sure that you do movement throughout the day, that you are being able to rest. the body, that you are getting some sunshine in your day, you're staying on track, you're getting movement, you're getting your steps in. Those are little things that will go a long way and long term. Alternative approaches, so this can be things like cognitive behavioral therapy, chiropractic care, massage therapy, even things into acupuncture is a big one, yoga, tai chi, meditation. So a lot of alternative therapies that are very helpful, and there's a lot of really great research out there through the support of these in managing pain, sleep, and stress. So that's definitely something to talk about with your healthcare providers to see if there's other elements that you can do as an alternative approach that might help you. Lifestyle, obviously focusing on sleep, focusing on nutrition, which we talked a lot about, and exercise. They're all going to help fight stress in your body. They're going to help you sleep better, and they're going to help you with inflammation in the body. If you are having a diet that is very high in processed foods and processed sugars, right, that is already causing digestive distress and higher levels of inflammation in the body. So solely just eating a whole food diet that's rich in minerals, nutrients, vitamins, all the good stuff. It is coming from the ground. It is fresh fruits and vegetables. It is good protein. These are things that are all very helpful in just eliminating that piece of inflammation in the body. So being mindful of our lifestyle and what we're choosing to input in our body. And then relaxation is another big piece. So how are we dealing with relaxation? How are we de-stressing? What elements are we doing? This can be mindfulness, meditation, gratitude, journaling, cognitive behavioral therapy, talking. So talk therapy is a really great one. So there's a lot of things that can cause us relaxation. Meditation for everyone does not look the same. So just being mindful of how you meditate. Maybe you like sleep meditations. Maybe you like a morning meditation. Maybe guided meditations. There's so many different apps and avenues out there. You can also do it yourself, but making sure that you are getting relaxation in, especially to wind down before sleep, so then you can get a good night's rest and then wake up feeling rejuvenated. So lots of ways for us to reset, and a lot of it stems down to the education and the awareness that these things exist. So making sure that you are asking those questions, that you're talking with your doctors, with your medical professionals, with people supporting you, your health and wellness coaches, your personal trainers, whoever it might be, to learn some of this stuff and go into those avenues of trying to figure out, where can we go to get it. So support and care needs, I always use the phrase doctoring outside the box because there are so many different avenues that we can go that will help us. So with our support and care needs, we need to address a variety of wellness concerns, and through that, there's a variety of treatments. So think that you're always in the center and you want to advocate for yourself wherever you go. You want to ask questions. You want to be your own expert, and you truly want to help the doctors and practitioners help you because you are the one that knows the most. So always make sure that when you're going to your appointments, that you're bringing those resources like your body mapping, that you're bringing a notebook that has your pain and stress scores, that you're telling them everything that they need to know, because ultimately, the more that you tell them, the more it's going to help them treat you. So making sure that you're seeking out primary care. Maybe that you have a behavioral therapist, maybe that you're seeking some type of behavioral health. Acupuncture, we talked about that, maybe chiropractic care, massage therapy, yoga therapy, right? Any of those different modalities. Tai Chi is another really good one, but any of those modalities that we can use that provide holistic care. Focusing on nutrition, maybe if you need nutrition support, you also ask for a referral for a registered dietitian. That can be very helpful. Group medical visits and also just peer support is very, very good for your social wellness, and it's a great place to share resources. So if you're someone who does do well in a social setting, join a peer support group, join some type of group community. Some medical places will have them, but you can do anything from like musical therapy to talk therapy to all different avenues. That is very helpful for one, engaging with others, learning from others, and also just being in a environment that gets you out of the house. substance use treatment, if this is applicable, obviously making sure that we are taking care of ourselves. And then the medical legal side, a lot of times not needed, but if it is needed for something to help you advocate for yourself, obviously we have that as a resource. So lastly, here are the references that we use throughout this PowerPoint. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing is to make sure that you're advocating for yourself and that you are making sure that you are focusing on your sleep, your stress, and your pain to address all of these different areas. So I truly hope that you take these elements with you and that you use them the next time that you go to the doctor, that you seek out a medical professional to really be able to tell your journey of what you're doing and how they can support you. So with that, I hope you have a fantastic day. This will be a topic that we'll continue to touch on, to talk about, and there will be more to come. So thank you and enjoy your day.